All right, we're back. We are COMP397 in the winter 2018 semester. We're week 2, part 2 of our broadcast. We just finished doing some more setup and recapping some of the stuff we did last week. Now we're finally going to add some new stuff. All right, we also changed our project so that it links to our current version of easel.js. We did that in the index.html file, right? Here's where we did it. And what I want to do is I want to talk about adding a label. Now, we did the label last time, so I kind of crunch this in. And notice we did it down here. But look at all the work we did for it. Like I went and said, okay, I got my hello label. I've got my X and Y coordinates. And one of the challenges is that right now it's rotating on the corner. Can anyone tell me why it's doing that? Why is it doing this? It's rotating on the corner. I don't want it to rotate there. I want to rotate it from the middle. How come it's rotating from there? Why is this happening? No, it's not just because of that. But why is it rotating from the corner of my object? First of all, what is a text object? Well, to look at that, if you go to the Create.js library, and if I go to easel.js, all the documentation for your files and folder that you're going to do, the things we're going to do this semester is right here, easel.js docs. And if I scroll all the way down to text, you can see that text is a text class. And the super class to the text class is the display object class right here. I'm just going to make this a little bigger so you can see it. Take a look. So here's my display object class, right? My display object is right here. Well, that means the display object is a superclass. But even further up is the event dispatcher. And now my event dispatcher class is the super class of my text object. That means my text object is full of functionality because it inherits from 2 other classes. What does this mean? Well, take a look. If this is my text class, that means I have a hell of a lot of properties. Take a look at my index. Look at all these things. These are all the things I can do with my text class. One of them is called regex and reg_y, or a couple of them, regex and reg_y. And what the regex and reg_y properties do is they change the registration point, which is like, if you think about from a drawing perspective, I'm just going to put up firework for a second, just to use as our whiteboard. And I'm going to create a new file that's 640 by 480. So follow me here for a second so you can see what I'm talking about. So here's my new file, 640 by 480. And I want to make a new object that says hello world. So here's hello world. It's really small. Let's make it so it's much bigger. And we'll make it consoleless so we can make it similar to what we just did this morning. So here's consoleless. This is the type. And we'll move this to like 40 pixels. Right here's hello world, right? This is what your hello world looks like. Well, what it's trying to do is saying, okay, well, this is a display object, this thing, right? And every display object is the pivot point or the registration point is the top left corner. I don't want it to be the top left corner. I want to move my pivot point to the middle, right? So the way you do that is to change the registration values of every object. Now you can do that for any object that's the display object in Create.js, right? So going back to the documentation, I need to use the regex and reg_y properties, right, to change the left and right offset, left and top offset, right, of my object so that it's right here. And I'm going to use another method for that. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, I can go to here before I do my X and Y. I can go here and start typing hello label.regex is equal to hello label.getMeasuredWidth. That's a function to measure the width of the label and multiply that by 0.5. So that's going to change the X offset from the top left corner over to halfway through, right? And then I'm going to do the same thing for the Y offset, because that's not enough to do this. I'm going to do this too. Hello label.getMeasuredHeight this time, right, times 0.5. And now what's going to happen is it should rotate from the middle, because what I've done is I've kind of said, hey, don't look over here on the top left corner. Look here. I'm going to measure the width, take half the width, and that's going to be my regex value. I'm going to measure the height and take half the height, and that's going to be my y value. So it's going to be somewhere in here. And if I go back to the web and see what it looks like, now it's rotating approximately in the middle. All right. Why do I do that? Because, and let's move this to the middle somewhere. So I'm going to change my x to 320, and I move my label y to 240, right? Just to make it almost in the middle of the entire screen. You can see now that it's approximately in the middle. Now it's wobbling a little bit because it didn't measure exactly perfectly. That's number one. So you can see that it's at least in the middle. And why do I want to do this work? Because I want to center my labels on my screen. Now imagine if, I want to ask you this question. I didn't have one label, but I had a bunch of labels on the screen, and I want them all centered. Or maybe I want to control where all my objects are. If I had to do this for every label, all this work, there's like 6 lines of code here for every label. That's too much. I want to make, it's screaming at me for a class. I want to make a class. So in order for me to make a class, another object, I'm going to extend the built-in createJS.text object and make my own label class. Now this is key, guys. So if you don't know how to do this, this is going to mess you up when it comes to your own game. So please watch carefully, because you're going to have to make many, many, many classes of your own, right? I want to make my class in a separate file because I want to keep organized. And I want to make it in its own folder, right? So I want to make its own label class. So first, notice my structure, scripts, core. It's not going to be my core folder. I want to make it in its own folder. So I'm going to make a new folder called objects, let's say. So all my objects, my game objects, are going to be in here. I want to make a label class. So I'm going to right-click on objects, and I'm going to add in a new file that I'm going to call label.ts. This is the process, by the way, that I'm showing you. Now, because I'm transpiling right away, it created a blank label.js file because it's watching for me to add or change anything. Okay, if it didn't do that, please Control-Shift-B and make sure you're transpiling. Next, I'm going to use the module keyword. Module, right? And the module is going to be called objects. Inside my module objects, I'm going to export. I'm using the export keyword so that it makes the class public. Export my class that's called capital L for label, which is going to extends createJS.text. Okay, why? Why did I do all that work, right? I did this because I want to create a new label class. I want to take the current functionality of my createJS.text object, and I want to add more stuff to it. In fact, all I want to do is change the constructor, so it allows me to add in more information for now. Most classes are going to have stuff like this. I'm probably going to have private instance variables. I'm probably going to have them. I'm probably going to have public properties. I'm probably going to have those. I'm probably going to have a constructor. I'm probably going to have private methods. And I'm probably going to have public methods. By the way, this is the same structure that we would have worked on together if you took COMP100, COMP123 with me. No problem. I would have set up the same way. Now, these are just comments. This is the way we do comments. All I care for right now is a constructor. And the name for the constructor by default is constructor. Right? My constructor, because this object is it has an is a relationship with createJS.text. That means this is a text object. It needs to call the superclasses constructor. And notice it's waiting for a text object, a font object, a color. They're all optionals because they have the question mark. The question mark says that they're all optional properties. That's what it means. So for now, let's just leave them blank. But how do I want my constructor to function? Well, I want to basically take in something called my label text or label string, which is of type string. I also want to take in, I'm just going to make this bigger. I'm also going to take in my font if I go here, look at I need a font too, and I need a font size, which is of type string, and a font family, which is of type string, and a font color, which is also of type string. Woo! By the way, I haven't changed anything. This is all I've done is broken apart my font size and my font family, because typically my super constructor requires this: a text, a font, and a color, right? And I just want to break out my font so I can break out the size of my font and the font family. That's all I'm doing. Just to make it easier to see for you guys, okay? I'm going to put this on separate lines, okay, just to make it easier. I'm just going to do one of these, okay? So you can see the constructor properties a little easier. Not because I want to do it for any other reason, just for you. So these label string, font size, font family, font color, these are all on separate lines, but they're all in one line, really. This is all one big line. I also want the X and Y coordinates. I want to say the X coordinate, which is a number, right? I also want the Y coordinate, which is a number. And I also want, well, is it centered? Is centered, which is a Boolean. That's my own special one. Now, by the way, see how this is laid out, this format? If I don't like it, I want to make it formatted properly. I can Control A for all, select all, right-click, and I want to format my document, and then it'll just space everything out. So I did all my spaces. Okay, now that I have my options, you know what? I want to make it optional. If the person doesn't want to enter an X and Y or is centered component, I want to give some optional values. By the way, I'm showing you how to create a class with optionals. This is important because you're going to have to customize your own constructors and make your own class. So my X, I want to make it optional. I'm going to give it a value of 0. So if the person doesn't give me a value, the person using this class, I want to kind of set my X and Y values to 0, and I also want to make my is centered value false by default. So it's not going to be centered by default. What this does is it makes it so that I don't have to enter X, Y, and is centered. I just need my basic stuff. Next, I want to pass some of this stuff off to the super constructor. I want to pass in the super constructor, I want to pass in the label string. I want to pass in the font size, but it only takes one font property, so I want to combine it. I want to say that my font size plus a space plus my font family is what I'm going to pass into my font. And my font color is what I'm going to pass in here. I'm passing that into the super constructor because that's what text objects require. Text objects require these 3 pieces of information. Next, I'm going to set this.x is equal to x. So whatever I get from my constructor, I'm going to set the x value. This.y is equal to y. Now, this is the key point, the reason why I made this whole class in the first place, right? If is centered, so if the person wants the font to be centered, and if they turn this switch true, then this.regex is equal to this.getMeasuredWidth, right, times 0.5. And this.regY equal to this.getMeasuredHeight times 0.5. That's my code, really, in a nutshell. Right now, I'm not going to make any special methods or anything else. Maybe in the future, and I think I will, I'll modify my class and add a couple of other methods to do different things for my font, my label. Right now, though, this is enough. Are you with me? Yes. Yep, I will. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to add all these things to the changes. I'm going to say added label class as my commit message. Click on the checkbox. Go here and push. Notice I can do all that in Visual Studio Code because I have GitHub integration. Okay, it's there. It should be up online now. All right, so we're good here, but guess what? We've not connected this to my project in any way. How do I know this? Because in my index.html, I don't have any listing of that. I have to list it in here now. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to write a new script tag. I'm going to point to /scripts/ instead of core, it's going to be objects / label.js. Got to be JS, not TS, because browsers don't understand TypeScript. Okay, cool. So that is all I need. Let's go back to my core in my game.ts. And let's take a look at this and see if I can use my new class. Okay, how do I know? Well, first of all, here's my hello label. I'm going to go to here. And I'm going to change this from createjs.text. It's not that way anymore. I want it to make it objects. Here's my objects. Dot label. You see that? Now my new label is available as a new, in the new namespace objects. By the way, we're going to do another thing later on. I did something different this morning because I created a reference file. I don't have to do that right now because I figured out what I did wrong. So here's objects.label. And then down in my main, instead of doing all this work right here, I don't have to do this anymore. I can just get rid of this. And inside, instead of createjs.text, I'll make this an objects.label. It needs more information, so I need to break off my 40 pixels and my console as fonts. And then I can also include things like 320 by 240, which is the size where my thing is, and that it's centered. True. Because that's my new label class that I made, right? If this is right, then my new label class should appear in the middle of my screen. Let's not make it rotate for now, just because I don't want to rotate it anymore, right? Just so we can see it. And now that I've saved, if I go back to my label, you should see this. Now I can reuse my label class over and over again in my game. Hot? I'm hot too. Any questions around my label class? Sure. Here or where? This one. Sorry, I know it's, let me space this out so you can see it all. I'm going to make it over 2 lines here. Because otherwise you can't see the label. I shall break it here. Put this back here so you can see it over 2 lines. Makes sense? You can do that. You can split your code over 2 lines, no problem. I'm really big. I've made my font size really big so you guys can see it. So that's why it's not fitting. All right, and all I did, by the way, Igor, is at the top. Make sure you put this up here because I changed my hello label to an objects.label. You need to do that too. If you don't do that, then it won't work. Now, does this make any sense? So I can make many, many labels now because I have a label class. I can make label objects. And they're a little bit better than the regular built-in one from create.js. Okay? Well, this is cool, but I want to make a button. And actually, forgive me for that button earlier, but that's the button we're going to make. I've already put a button object online for you. So if you actually go up on Slack, right, you can see that further down, I have this really ugly button I made. It's just an image. So please download this image. And also, I'm going to use some assets in my project. I'm going to download this assets file. So see this assets? If you actually go to up on Slack here, you can download my assets. It's under MP assets. And I'm going to add it to my project now. Let's do that. So in order for me to do that, I'm going to go into my downloads. I'm going to go to MP assets. I'm going to grab my 3 files, my 3 folders, actually. And I'm going to go into my project. I'm going to go into my folder structure. I'm going to add a new folder called assets with a capital A. And inside my assets folder, I'm going to drag and drop or copy and paste those files. And just for completeness, I'm going to rename them here in the operating system this time around. I did it in Visual Studio Code this morning, but for now, I'm just going to rename these things so that they're lowercase audio files. Instead of sprites, I'm going to rename the sprites from sprites to images. That's what they are. And if I look inside my project now, I have that structure. So if you look at my project, I have assets. And inside assets, I have audio, fonts, and images. And I gave you those from the web. Yeah? Where did I get them? Yeah. I got them from Slack. I put them on Slack. I have this little link for all my assets on Slack on the bottom. You can download them. And the button is the other one. I want to download this button too. So I can click on download. I want to download this button. Right? So I'm going to, let's say I can download. You can see if you can download this button. And I can open in the containing folder. Here's my button. And I'll just do it instead of doing it on in the operating system this time, I'll do it inside of VS Code. Notice that I can go into images. And I should be able to just drag and drop from images into my button into the images like this. So you can see that now I have this button called Click Me button, which is really exciting. I'm super excited about my Click Me button I made this morning. It's awesome. Not. Okay, so I've got my Click Me button. I'm going to use this to make my button. So a button, there is no button in Create.js or Easel.js. I got to make my own button. So if I look at my Easel.js, I have another class that I can use. This is the text class. I have another class called bitmap. So let's go into the bitmap class. And I'm going to use a bitmap that looks like this. Okay, a bitmap is just an image. Remember we talked about this? It's a series of pixels inside of a file with color. Pixels are just pixel images or picture images, right? That's all they are. And each pixel is a point. It has two properties, a point and a color. That's all they are, right? So there's a point in space in the bitmap, and there's a color for the pixels, and that's what makes up my image. I'm going to make a bitmap, but I'm going to create a bitmap that has some events tied to it. So if you click on the bitmap, it's going to act like a button. It's going to do something. If I hover over the bitmap, it's going to do something. If I hover out of the bitmap, it's going to do something. So when my button comes along, when I make my button class, it's going to be based off of the bitmap class. Okay, let's do this thing. So first, let's do it the old way. I'm going to go to my game.ts. I need to make some kind of bitmap. So I'm going to say, let's click me button. Here's all the work I have to do normally, right? Is of type create.js.bitmap, right? So I kind of make a bitmap right here. And then I'm going to scroll down to my main. And let's put these together because these two are related. I'm going to make a new bitmap. Okay, that's how this works. So click me button is equal to a new create.js bitmap. And it requires a link to the bitmap, which is /assets /images /click me button.png. That's the absolute path. I will stop that later. Right now, we're using absolute path because it's easy. In the future, we'll do something different. Actually, it's relative path, but it's for I want to make it so that it works for any button, not just for the click me button. Right now, it only works for the click me button. Okay, cool. So that's the button, but I still need to do the other stuff. I still need to do my click me button. I want to make it so that the registration point is in the middle again. I'm going to say regex is equal to my click me button dot get bounds. That's different than this time. Width times 0.5. It's a different function for images than it is for text, all right? And my click me button dot reg y is equal to click me button dot get bounds dot height times 0.5. Okay, so that's the registration marks. And then I'm going to make the x and y coordinates. We've done this before. Dot x is equal to, let's say, the center of the screen, 320. And my click me button dot y is going to be something like 340. Okay. And then, because I'm adding it to the display list on my screen, the stage is a display object. It has all the full display list. So I'm going to use the add child method to put it onto the stage. I'm going to attach it to the stage. Stage.addChild, click me button. Okay, so now it's going to display, but it's not going to do anything. It's just going to be an image on the stage. Why? It's not a button yet. A button, you can do stuff with it. There's behavior. There's no behavior. There's just an image. Let me show this to you. I'm going to go back to the stage, and I see a button. But if I click onto it, if I hover over it, nothing happens. Right? This is what you should see right now. Let me push this change so you see what I'm talking about, so you can do it too. So here's all the changes. These are all the assets. So that's really what I'm adding. I'm adding all these assets to the staging area. I'll say added assets. I haven't really completed my button yet anyway. And push. So you guys should have all those assets up online, as well as some of this code. Okay, cool. This is good, but it doesn't do anything. I need to add some events for that. And the way to do that is to add an on event. So, one thing you need also to do before you do that, if you want the hover events to work, like if you want me to hover over the button so it to work, I need to turn something on the stage. And I got to talk about this just a second. So stage.EnableMouseEvents, EnableMouseOver. EnableMouseOver is actually a function that takes a number. Let me explain this. I have to give it the frequency of checks. Why is that? Because it's a very computationally expensive function. What it's doing is every frame, it's checking to see that my mouse is over this image or over some image. And it checks for every image on the screen. So if I have 30,000 images on the screen, it's going to check for every one of them. It's very, very expensive, right? So we only want to turn this EnableMouseOver event on when we're using a menu or some kind of object. In game, we want to turn this off because otherwise it's going to do a lot of extra checks for nothing, right? If we don't have any buttons in the game. So that's number one. You need to do this for buttons. So turn this on for buttons, right? Now, further down, I need to make the events. So I'm going to say click. Look at all the work I have to do. Click me button got on my mouse over event, which is going to call some kind of method, right? We're going to call it click me button mouse over. We don't have that yet, so it's going to be a red line for now. And you know what? Just going to copy paste. I need two more of those. I need a mouse out event, which we're going to call mouse out. We need a click event, which we're just going to call click. So every button needs this stuff because you need to mouse over, mouse out, and click, right? I've got 3 events that I have to write too. Let's write those. I know it looks like a lot for buttons, but they are, right? They have to have all this functionality, right? So if I go up here, let's write those 3 functions, right? So function, we're going to call this. Now, the great thing about CreateJS, it already kind of can identify stuff I've written. So I'm going to do the mouse over event first, right? Mouse over returns void. And what it does is I'm going to say that the click button, the click me button dot alpha, that's an alpha property, is going to be equal to 0.7. So what that's saying is the opacity of the alpha channel is going to be only 70%. So there's going to be 30% transparent. That's what I'm going to do with the button. That's how I'm going to handle it. By the way, you can do other things. You can swap out the images. So if you hover over something, you can swap the image of the button out and change the image altogether to make it another image, right? I'm not doing that here. Let's do the same thing for my mouse out event. So when I go out of the button, so mouse out, and what I'm going to say is that the click me button.alpha channel is going to go back to 100%. So I'm going to make it fully opaque again. So when I hover over, it's 70% opaque, 30% transparent. And when I hover out, it's 100% opaque, 0% transparent. Okay? And let's finish off with my click event. Click me button click event. So my click event is going to be unique. Every time I make a button, I have to have another click event because every button will be different, right? So this one, what I wanted to do is I want to affect the hello label. So my hello label.text, right, is going to be, let's say clicked, right? You clicked on me, right? Clicked on the button, and then my text is going to change, right? Now there's a problem with this. Because we measured our text width to make it centered, I have to remeasure again. That makes sense? Because my X and Y coordinates are the same, but my measured width and height are different because I have a different text object. So what I need to do here is I need to change my hello label.regX and regY, which basically tells me I need another method in my label, right? I got to remeasure again. Hello label dot get measured width, here it is, right, times 0.5, and hello label dot regY is equal to hello label dot get measured height, sorry, times 0.5. And I need to do this again because the size of my text value here is different than the size of this, and I'm measuring this to center, not this. So because I changed it, I have to do it again. And if I have to do this again, guess what? I need a method in my label class. So every time I set, I don't do it this way. I use the set text method, something else. I don't have it yet, right? Which does all this for me all the time, right? Which makes sense. Okay, cool. We haven't made a game. We're just making parts of a game. We're making a tech label and a button right now. But I'm also trying to get you to understand how A, Create.js works, and B, TypeScript, and C, Visual Studio Code. Like, there's a lot of stuff I'm teaching you at the same time. I will. So added a button, we'll say button event listeners. That's all I did here. Oh, and handlers. Okay, so that's a big comment. Normally I don't like to use that kind of comments because it's too big, but it's okay for us. There we go. And that should be up in another second. There we go. Now it should be up for sure. All right, so let's test it and see if it works because, you know, we did it, but we don't know if it's even working. So let's go back to here and we see the button now. Look, it hovers in and out. This is good. That's how it should work, right? So it gives us a feedback that I'm using the button because I'm hovering in and out of the button, right? And if I click on the button now, it says clicked, but it only does it one time. If I click on it again, it doesn't do anything because it's already clicked, right? Now I can make it toggle because if I click on it, I can just click on it again and it'll toggle back to the other thing. But for now, this is enough. If I refresh, just to prove it, and if I click on it again, you can see that it works. Okay, whoa, that's a whole hell of a lot of stuff to do for a button. And I don't want that. I need a class. It's screaming for a class, this one, even more than the other one did, right? So I need to make a class, and let's do another one so you can see it yet again. There's a lot of work I have to do here, and I don't want to do this work every single time. Now, I'm going to run into a little bit of a problem this time around. Here's the problem I'm going to run into. I'm telling you this in advance, so before I build my class. 1, this object is never created yet. My bitmap gets created after I pass in the image. from my into my superclass, right? So I may not be able to do this, get bounds, width, and height, because I don't have an image yet. I haven't instantiated it. I haven't added it to the stage yet, so it's not going to work. So my regx and regY values, I cannot add to the class because it'll never work not like this, unless something I'm going to do next week with you guys is preload all my images and sounds ahead of time. I'm going to preload everything. And when I preload, I have a blob, which is actually data, and then I can measure it. Right now, I can't measure it because I got nothing, right? Now, you may not understand what I'm talking about, but try it out. Try adding get bounds, width, and height to your class. It won't work because there is no object yet. And you're trying to measure something that doesn't exist. It's going to give you undefined. Okay, so going back to the objects, here's my objects. I want to add another object. It's going to be a button object. Let's add it in. So I'm going to say new file. It's going to be called button.ts, right? Just like last time, I need to do a module. I'm going to use the same module name, objects. I'm going to export my class, which is going to be button with a capital B. It's going to extend the create.js.bitmap class. Remember, that's what I did, the bitmap. I'm going to make a new type of bitmap. This bitmap is going to have some button qualities. I may have some private instance variables, maybe. I may have some public properties, maybe. Probably a constructor. Probably going to have some private methods, maybe some public methods. Okay, that's the way I start my class, right? I do a structure for my class. So it's the same every time. Okay, cool. Let's add a constructor first. In my constructor function, I need to call my super constructor. My super constructor really needs like something of a image path, right? That's what it needs. I don't have that yet. I need an image path, right? Because that's what I'm sending into my constructor for my button. I'm going to say, hey, button, I want a button with this type of image on it, right? So I'm going to send that into the constructor. So the constructor is going to have an image path, which is going to be of type string. It also needs X and Y coordinates, that as well. And I'm going to set them to default values again. I'm going to make them so that there's defaults for these X and Y coordinates, which means that even if I don't put values in there, it's going to take them. However, it's always going to be centered. My button, I'm not going to let my buttons be not centered because that's weird, right? Maybe in the future, we might modify that if we want all my buttons left aligned or something, but typically not. Okay, cool. Well, that means that there's going to be this dot x is equal to x and this dot y is equal to y. This is all regular stuff, nice and easy. Now the tough part. I need to set up my event handlers. Sometimes, I got to point this out to you guys, sometimes event handlers doesn't work properly here because event handlers themselves have their own scope. And this is a problem with not just JavaScript, but also C# and C++ and a lot of other things. So I want to do something like this. I want to say this dot on. I can say this because this object is a bitmap. So therefore, I'm adding its own event handler as I'm creating it, or event listener. On mouse over, right? I'm going to call something called this dot mouse over, and it's going to be with an underline because it's a private method. So mouse over. I don't have this yet. And the same thing with mouse out. It's going to use something called this dot underscore mouse out as an event listener and an event handler. Now, why am I using the underscore value? I'm using underscore because that's my convention. Whenever I use underscore from now on, here on in for this entire semester, it means private. Because I don't need to share my mouse over and mouse out event, right, with the world. It is not required. So I'm going to make it a private method. So that means in here, I'm going to make this private. I did this differently in this earlier class. Underscore mouse over, return void. And the mouse over method is going to do the exact same thing it did before. It's going to say this dot alpha, right, is equal to 0.7. And my private mouse out is going to do the same thing. This dot alpha channel is equal to 1.0. Now remember that I can use the keyword this, which refers to the object that I'm modifying. That's the context. The whole object is this. That's what I'm referring to, right? And because my object is a bitmap, right, it has all the properties of a bitmap. That's why I can do alpha. Alpha is a property that's part of the bitmap class. And so I can access it. Okay, this is my button. That's it. I can't add my regx and regY. It will fail 100% because there's no, the button has no object yet. Okay, cool. So I have to, now the next part, let me push this part. So this is added button object. Here's my commit. I'm going to add it to the staging area. I'm doing this all within Create.js, Visual Studio, right? I'm going to click onto it to make the commits, and then I'm going to go push. Now I'm showing you how to do it this way because it's just easier, right? But you can certainly do all of this with command line. All right, so my button is pushed, except it's not connected. I got to go to my index.html, and I got to connect it here too. And instead of label, I'm going to put in button. Yes. Not yet. I haven't finished the other part. I have to go back to my game.ts and finish that. I haven't done that yet. But good observation. So I'm going to go to my core. I'm going to go to my game.ts. And now at the top, instead of it being a Create.js bitmap, it's got to be an objects.button. Okay, I made my own button, objects.button, right? And then as I scroll down, I can get rid of stuff. I don't need these two methods anymore because they're part of my button class. So I can get rid of them. And I can't add my click me button click event or my click me button click event handler in my button class because they're always going to be different. So therefore, I'll never add them. Now, there are ways you can add it in, and then you can modify it afterwards. But it's way more difficult than just not adding them. Okay, I also don't need this stuff, 320 and 340. I don't need this stuff. And I don't need these lines of code because this is all handled by the class. So it cuts down a little bit for now. We're gonna cut these out next week. Okay, we can't cut them out now. But here, this is good. I just got to change this from Create.js bitmap to objects.button. I'm going to pass in X and Y coordinates of 320 and 340. This should be the exact same as what I did, but now I can make as many buttons as I want this way. Now that means that all of my buttons though are going to be the exact same. That means every time I make a button, I can hover over it and it's going to change the opacity, right, from 100% to 70%. That's the way my buttons are going to work, right? If you wanted something else, then you'd have to program some other thing in your buttons. Like if you wanted to swap out the image to something else. I don't have that right now. Again, you can see the work that's involved because it's all manual. Everything that we're doing here is manual work. Let's check it before we push it again. Let's check it to see if it's working. So I'm going to refresh the screen. And if I hover, the hovering works. If I click the click me button, the click works. And to check this, to make sure that I'm not lying, you can see that if I go to sources, I can look at, notice I have assets images in my browser sync. Here's my file system. That's interesting. It's my contents. Let's refresh that. That's what I wanted. In my scripts, I have my objects, and I can see that I have my button here. Here's my button TS class. I can see it right in here, inside of my browser. And you should be able to see it too. So I've got button click functionality. I got my hello world, and I did that all with classes. So recap, let me just push this up to GitHub. Oops. Okay, I'm going to go to GitHub, and I'll say something like modified theme.ts to include new button class. That's really long again. This is a really long comment. You shouldn't make comments so long. For us right now, it's okay, but you should keep comments very short. Push. Now you should have all my changes. Any questions around this? Because this is a hell of a lot of stuff we just did. Yeah.
I showed me error. Cannot create property
Width of null. Here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it shouldn't do that because you have if you've made a correct button, then you shouldn't do this. This shouldn't give you this issue. This is the problem that I was trying to worry about before, right? Now it may still be giving you this issue because of the way the button's being loaded, but it shouldn't give you this problem, right? So that means that inside your object, if I go to console, I shouldn't be getting any errors. If I refresh, right? There shouldn't be any errors in here. If you see an error like that, something else is wrong, right? You shouldn't have that. Check my code. Make sure that your code and my code are the same. Someone asked this morning, and I didn't do it. Well, okay, do something else. Don't just make it so that the click button makes it change to the name. Let's make it so that when I click it, not only does it change this part, but it also rotates it, like inside my start method. Okay, that's a real issue. And why would that be an issue? Because inside my update method is where all the fun stuff happens, right? This is where all the fun stuff happens. And in my click me button, right, I can't enable something in here unless there's something already in here to enable. It's almost like my button itself has to have its own update function that I'm calling, right? And it doesn't have one right now. But that's how I would do it. It would be a lot more work to do to make that button, do that. I have to go there. I'd have to create an update method in my button, which doesn't make any sense because normally I'm not going to have a rotating button, right? If I had rotating buttons all the time, then it makes sense. But this is not going to make sense. So let's take a look at my code. My code is, again, I want you to think of this, right? I've got my scripts. Inside my scripts, I have two folders now. I have my objects folder and my core folder. In my objects folder, I have two really new objects, my button class and my label class, right? These two, button and label. And there's two new objects that I'm creating, right? And those two new objects are the things that I can reuse over and over again. I also had to, just to remind you, I also in my index.html had to include them here. I can't avoid that. Sometimes what happens, and I'll tell you right now, in older versions of TypeScript and JavaScript, I have to include a reference file. So I'd like to do that with you now. The reference file, what it does sometimes is it keeps track of all the references, the links to all the new objects I'm creating, okay? Right now it's doing automatic reference adding, right? So it adds everything automatically. But in the future, we may need a way of adding things manually. So let's add that file in now. So I'm going to go into my core folder. I'm going to add a new file, and I'm going to call it _references.ts. What this file is going to do for us is it's going to explicitly reference my new objects, right? To create a path to link these objects to my application. Now I don't need this, but I'm telling you this for completeness and also for backwards compatibility, right? The way to do that is to use the // like this. Then reference path. Actually, type that out. And to create something like this, where the reference path is the path to my new button and label. Let's do the label first. So it's ./scripts/objects/label.ts and then /. Now notice if it's not right, see how it's giving me that little underline? It says that I can't find it. So like actually what's happening is my pathing is incorrect, right? What this does is says, hey, add this reference, a reference to my label.ts class so that TypeScript knows where to look. And I can do the same thing for my button class. So I can add another reference to my button class. If it has a problem, if I can't find it, it'll give you an error just like it did there. And why am I making this references thing anyway? Well, because what I can do is in my game.ts at the top, I can say something like this. I can reference my reference file. All right, so let's put that in. And instead of referencing the label directly, I can reference my reference file, which is in the same folder. I'm showing you this for completeness. I'm showing you this because this sometimes solves problems. Sometimes what happens is it can't find the reference to the new object you just created for whatever reason. It could be Visual Studio Code. It could be the way things are linked together. It could be your version of the operating system, which is different than my version. It could be a million things. And this will solve a lot of debugging issues. I'm telling you this in advance. You don't need it, but it's not going to hurt you. It's going to help, especially later on. So I'm going to add this in. I'm going to say added reference file. I'm going to add these in. And I'm going to push. Just in case I was too fast, which probably I am. So now you have those. That's the other thing that's inside my core, right? So core only has my objects and my game, and my references. Now, I think it was Ashley that asked me today, hey, what about if I want to go from one screen to another? Okay, what is a screen? The screen is the stage. That means I need something else. And I'm not going to cover this week, but I'm going to talk about what I'm going to do next week. Next week, I'm going to program something called a scene class, right? Which is going to prepare us to do moving from one screen to the next. For example, a menu to the game scene, from the game scene to the game over screen and back, right? I'm going to do that. Just to keep steady with what this is, I want you to think about, there's actually another object called the container object. So the container class can be used to contain anything. Let's suppose I have a character, and the character is actually I'm going to use it in a platformer. But the character doesn't just have a head. It has a head and a body and a bunch of other stuff. Instead of making separate objects for the head and for the body, I can add them inside my container. And my container is going to have a local coordinate space that's different from the global coordinate space. So think of it this way. It's almost like a little container object that I can put inside of my stage. Now let's extend that idea. I have my container object, but instead of my container object just being for a little object, let's suppose my container object contains everything on the stage. Hence, the scene class. I want to make a scene class, which is a type of container that contains all of the game objects on my scene. And then all I have to do is swap out my scene class, my game container, with something else. And anything that's inside that game container, I can just kill. It's much simpler than swapping stuff within the same scene. I'm making a container class that contains everything. From a membrane perspective, it's more performant, right? And what I can do is I can literally control the container to do things like transitions. I can move the container into my scene to make it look like the entire game is kind of flowing into my scene, like a transition. And I can make it so that it eases in and eases out. The whole container object can change, right? I can fade it in and fade it out. I can do a bunch of stuff, and that'll affect every object that's like a child of the container, right? So that's what we're going to be doing next week, right? And this is a great class. The only thing is, I just want to make sure you're aware of this. It says it's a nestable display object, right? But it's computationally expensive to have many, many containers on the same scene. So we're only going to have one, the game container. Okay? Because if you had more than one, and if I added a bunch of stuff to the container, then it could cause more problems later. That's all I want to cover today when it comes to the stuff. It's a lot of information. And I've pushed most of the stuff up on GitHub, I believe. Now I want to talk about some of the requirements one more time for next week. So tonight, just to recap, right? You have your team contract. It's due by midnight, right? And next week, you have your game pitch and game design document that is due next week. Remember that it's a PowerPoint presentation you got to create, right? I'm looking for a presentation. There's no game yet, right? So you're going to make a series of slides. And if you look at the game pitch and game design document idea, if you look at the folder, inside there is a series of requirements. So next week, I need a title page, roles, influences, a game overview. You know, what's the MDA? What are the mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics of the game? I talked about a little bit last week. Give me a planning slide. This is all due next week, right? So more like planning for your game. There's two files I'm looking for, the presentation file next week and the game design document that I went over earlier today, right? For tonight, let's go back for tonight. For tonight, you need your completed contract document. So if you look at the contract, there's two parts to it. One is the contract document as well as the team logo file. I want you to make your own logo for tonight. Those are the two things that are due tonight, for tonight, right? So the team logo, again, can be very, very simple. It could only just be like a shape, triangle, a hexagon with your initials on it, right? It could be as complex as you want to make it, right? So for the remainder of the time, you have 20 minutes or so, right? I want to give you some time to do some organization today. And I want to talk to any of the teams that have maybe potentially problems. So I'm going to stop recording now, and I'm going to talk to you guys about anything else you've got going on. All right? I've got some groups that I created. Please use the groups that I created up on eCentennial. So I'm going to go up to groups. Here are the groups. If you look at the groups on eCentennial, you can see that there's many groups here. Please, if you haven't signed up already, sign up for a group that's free, right? And make sure you enroll your members. That's it for me today, guys. I'll see you guys next week, and I'm looking forward to seeing your game pitches. I'll change it. Come over after. I'll change your group name. All right, that's it.